Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making on their healing journey and how it completely stops them from moving forward and letting go of what happened. When we feel shitty and like we can't get out of our own way, we are always looking for the answer as to why that is. Oftentimes we blame our jobs, our spouse, our kids, the neighbors, the person that checked us out at the grocery store, someone who cut us off in traffic. And yes, these things do piss us off, and often they feel like an inconvenience. But when we feel really shitty and like we can't get out of our own way, it's actually something much deeper, really deep. And when we get this word or a label that makes us say, oh, wow, that's it. I get it now. I see why I do the things that I do, or I see why I feel the way that I feel. We think it's our golden ticket to the other side of the bullshit, and we're ready to take that golden ticket and run with it. This ticket, though, isn't actually going to get you to where you think you want to be or where you need to be. And it's definitely not going to get you into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, although I wish it would. It's not even really a golden ticket if we're not going to use the label in a way that gives us the most bang for our buck. And what I'm about to say might ruffle some feathers, but hear me out. So this word, this label that we get that makes us say, oh, I get it now. Often the labels that we get are anxious or codependent or enmeshed or depressed or I have OCD. There's a lot of labels that we throw around for ourselves. And so when we get this label, though, it is not actually the key to the healing. It's, in fact, often the nail in the coffin. And it was for me, and it has been for the clients I've worked with too. And here's why. As soon as we get that label, and when we get it, it's often given to us with good intentions. So when I was given my label, my first label of codependency by my therapist, I'm not going to say the intention was bad. I don't think she did it to sabotage me or to make me feel bad about myself or to make me hate my parents or my family and feel like I had generational trauma that I had to heal. I don't think it was any of those things. I think it was her way of giving me this label to give me some awareness about why I was doing the things that I was doing. So we get this label. And maybe it wasn't from the therapist. Maybe it was from a YouTube video that you watched or a TikTok that you watched. But you get this label, you find this word and you think, yes, that's it. That explains it all. And then we get that label, that word, and we attach it to ourselves in the way that a moth is drawn to the flame. And it becomes who we are, inside and out, everything about us. So when my therapist gave me the word codependent, I didn't even know what that word meant. I'd never heard it before. I asked her what it was and she said, oh, it's when you take on other people's emotions. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. I can see that I do that. So I left my session and I went home and I Googled it and I could easily check yes to all the boxes for someone that has codependency based on their behaviors, their thought processes, things like that. I could check yes to all of those things. And I thought, finally, oh my gosh, now that I know I'm codependent, all of my problems will be gone. Instead, everything blew the fuck up. I must have said because I'm codependent 8,000 times. I shit you not. When I would lose my patience with my kids, it's because I'm codependent. When I would get frustrated with my husband, it's because I'm codependent. I wouldn't tell people no. And then I would get angry because I didn't have any boundaries in place and I felt like I was being taken advantage of or used or something like that. And I would get angry and frustrated, but I would say, I can't tell people no because I'm codependent. So then my therapist was really good at giving me labels. So then she gave me the label of anxiety. Oh, do you consider yourself to be an anxious person? And I didn't. But again, I left the session. I went home. I Googled anxiety and darn it, if I couldn't check yes to all the different kinds and all the boxes again. So then my key phrase was no longer, it's because I'm codependent. It was, it's because I'm codependent and anxious. So every single time I would say, it's because I'm codependent, or it's because I'm anxious, or it's because I'm codependent and anxious, I did absolutely nothing. I'm going to say it again, absolutely nothing to change anything about the situation. I'd have a pity party for myself about how defeated and hopeless and angry and fucked up I was. And then I'd be trapped in whatever my current hell was. And that was how I functioned. And let me add, I was probably worse off with the labels than I was before I had gotten the labels. So it was really a huge detriment because I clung to those labels because it was the only glimpse I had to have an understanding about why I felt so shitty and why I was doing the things that I was doing. And I felt like, okay, I know codependency now. I know anxiety now. The other label that was thrown at me was enmeshed. And then I got the label of childhood emotional neglect. And so every time I got one of these labels, then I went into this ownership mode and completely attached it to who I was. It was like Velcroed, magnetized, super glued to me. And that was who I became, this codependent, anxious, enmeshed, neglected person. And the labels really did make it feel like nothing would ever change. I'd always be codependent. I'd always be anxious. I'd always be enmeshed. It was just who I was. It was just how things were. And that was the way that it was going to be. And so I felt like if it was going to be this way all the time, then what was the point anyway? Like, what was the point of it all? And so it made me feel even more desperate and like giving me the idea or the glimmer of like maybe ending things, because I just felt like there was no point to live a life filled with codependency, anxiety, enmeshment, neglect, and all of those things. And so I have to tell you though, that this isn't just my experience with labels. I see people all the time that I work with and helping them on their healing journey. And they'll say things like, well, that's going to be really hard for me to try that because I'm always depressed. Or I really can't do that. That's really not going to work for me because I have anxiety. And so they label themselves. They think that's who they are as a person. They think that they're anxiety. They think that they're depression. And so the more we call ourselves these labels and say these things, the harder it becomes to let them go. It becomes harder to see yourself with an identity outside of those labels. And so what we need to do is we need to see that they're just patterns that we run. They're based on patterns of what we think about ourselves. They are based on what we think other people think of us. And honestly, these patterns, this codependency pattern, this anxiety pattern, this depression pattern, enmeshed pattern, all of these things helped us survive in the past. So they served a purpose. But back then, in the past, we were in survival mode, and we don't have to be in survival mode anymore. So it's time to stop labeling ourselves with all of these labels, with these words that make us feel hopeless, defeated, broken, and labeling ourselves is really honestly the last thing that we should be doing, because it doesn't give us the tools to move forward. It just gives us an identity to attach to. So we need to stop saying that we are these things, and we need to say that we're running a pattern of codependency, because then we can take that pattern of codependency and we can analyze it and get some really important information. It's actually the golden ticket to help you move forward on your healing journey. And so we have to stop making this mistake of attaching ourselves, our identity, everything about us to these labels, because it's really only sabotaging you and your journey.